The son of Sonora shows no mercy to sinners, and even less to the forgotten. The cantina was in semi-darkness. Threads of light pierced through the cracks, illuminating the smoke, the spilled mezcal, and the faces that didn't dare look straight ahead. In the center of the room, a huge man violently held the arm of a young Apache woman. It was Don Raphael, owner of most of the lands in the region, and a man convinced that God had given him permission to behave like a demon. His face was red with rage and alcohol, a mask of arrogance that hid a deep insecurity. The woman was Elena, a young woman of Apache blood who wore leather clothes and traditional beads, a living reminder that this land had owners long before European steel arrived. Her black hair fell in disordered braids over her shoulders, framing a face that refused to be subdued. Her face was stained with dirt, but her eyes shone with a fierce intelligence that no chain could contain. "Sign the paper, woman," roared Raphael, his voice bouncing off the adobe walls like thunder. He held a crumpled document and a quill, tools of legalized robbery. Elena spat on the floor, an act of defiance worth more than 1,000 words. "That land belongs to my people by decree of the crown and by ancestral right," she said with a firm voice that did not tremble. "Your maps are false, Raphael. They are scribbles of a liar who fears the truth." The giant let out a hoarse laugh that sounded like stones crashing against each other. "The law is me in this desert, and the crown is too far away to hear the cry of an Indian girl," he replied. The people at the tables looked down, searching in the bottom of their glasses for the courage they had lost years ago. No one wanted problems with the man who bought local soldiers and the consciences of judges. There were miners with lungs full of stone dust, tired ranchers, and a couple of card players who knew life was a lost bet. All of them were petrified, turned into statues of salt by the terror that Don Raphael inspired. Alina looked around, desperately searching for a trace of humanity in that room full of shadows. "Please help me," she said, holding back the tremble in her voice. But when she saw that no one moved, her fear turned into indignation. "Do none of you truly remember who these lands belonged to?" she shouted, looking at the men in the cantina one by one. "Today they come for my people. Tomorrow they will come for your children." Don Raphael's expression deformed with rage. He raised his fist to hit her, and Alina turned her face, preparing for the impact. No one moved. An old peasant squeezed his glass until his knuckles turned white. A woman in the corner covered her eyes with her shawl, preferring darkness to the shame of not acting. Fear was an invisible wall, a fortress of cowardice that no one dared to cross. But the blow never came. From the entrance of the cantina, silver spurs began to sound on the wooden floor. "Before continuing, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for accompanying me in this story. It is a true honor to share these tales with you. I wish that God blesses you, protects you, and that peace and hope never be missing from your homes. And if you enjoy the way we tell these stories, I invite you to subscribe to the channel." Now the stranger cowboy walked toward the bar. His steps were slow, rhythmic, but each one seemed to weigh a ton. Breaking the tension in the air, Don Raphael turned, momentarily releasing Alina's arm, surprised that someone dared to interrupt his tyranny. "Get out of here, stranger," warned Raphael, his right hand resting near the handle of his whip. "This is not your business, and in San Judas the curious end up feeding the vultures." The cowboy did not respond. His indifference was more insulting than any insult. He took off his hat and placed it on the wooden bar, revealing a face marked by experience and tragedy. His hair was dark, and in his eyes there was something forged by loss, something that Don Raphael recognized too late. "A glass of water," said the cowboy in a voice that seemed to come from the depths of a cave, a voice that did not know fear. The bartender, trembling like a leaf in the storm, served the water with clumsy hands. Don Raphael felt ignored, and in his world of privileges, that was a mortal sin paid with blood. He approached the cowboy and placed a heavy, sweaty hand on his shoulder. "I told you to get lost, you road animal," he growled, his breath stinking of mezcal and arrogance. The cowboy looked at the hand on his shoulder as if it were a bothersome insect. Then he looked Don Raphael directly in the eyes, a look that had seen battlefields and nameless cemeteries. "Remove your hand," said the cowboy. It was an order, not a request. It was the sentence of a destiny that was already written. Don Raphael let out a mocking laugh, seeking the approval of his thugs at the door. "Or what will you do, field mouse? Are you going to dirty my boot wit? Eat your blood." In a movement so fast that the human eye could barely follow, the cowboy grabbed Raphael's wrist. The stranger twisted the tyrant's wrist and forced him to release Alina. The big man stumbled back with a cry, but before falling, he signaled toward the door. His two men drew their guns. One fired first. The bullet grazed the edge of the bar and raised a shower of splinters next to the stranger's face. A splinter cut his cheek. It was barely a cut, but enough to remember that even the fastest men can bleed. Lucas responded with two precise shots. One of the men fell wounded, the other lost his weapon and collapsed against a table. For the first time, security abandoned Don Raphael's face. The smoke of gunpowder filled the room, a gray veil that enveloped the violence. The silence returned, but this time it was a silence of astonishment, not terror. The cowboy released Raphael's wrist as one releases trash. He turned toward Alina, his expression softening for a brief moment. "Are you all right?" he asked. His voice was now a refuge. She nodded, though her chest rose and fell with the violence of someone who had just escaped the claws of death. "He wants to force me to hand over the titles of the mission and the communal lands," explained Alina. "He has spent years falsifying grants and expelling families who cannot defend themselves." But what Alina was about to reveal was more dangerous than any pistol in that cantina, because those papers could not only destroy Raphael, they could implicate judges, soldiers, and officials throughout the province. "He has been falsifying land deeds for years, taking advantage of the chaos of the wars in Europe." Don Raphael, groaning on the floor like the coward he always was behind his mask, tried to reach for a knife hidden in his boot. Lucas simply stepped on his hand with his spurred boot, the silver of the spur shining with vengeful glow. "Stay there," said the stranger. His voice was the weight of a mountain. Alina approached the table where Raphael had left his papers. She took out a small leather bag she carried hidden under her clothes. From it, she extracted an old accounting book and a yellowed map with the seal of the first viceroys. "I spent months working in this man's house as a servant, being invisible so he would show his true face," she said to the crowd. "I saw him erase the names of the true owners and order the burning of church records so no family could claim their inheritance." The people began to murmur. The spell of fear was breaking under the sun of truth. Alina showed a letter with the royal seal of Spain, a document that Raphael should never have had. This letter orders the review of all land grants in the valley. It was sent from Mexico City under the authority of the viceroy, but Raphael the cowboy looked at Alina with profound respect, a spark of admiration in his steel eyes. She was not just a woman in danger, she was a strategist, a warrior who used the law and truth as her deadliest arrows. Don Raphael tried to speak, to babble a defense, but only a gurgle of blood and bitter saliva came out. "You all knew it in the bottom of your souls," said Alina, looking at the inhabitants of the town, her words cutting like obsidian knives. "You knew that his wealth was built on the corpses of my ancestors and on the hunger of your own children." The old peasant, the same one who had squeezed the glass, stood up with recovered dignity. "She is right," he said with a trembling voice that gained strength with every syllable. "They killed my brother for 1 acre of land that he said was his, and I stayed silent out of fear of ending up the same. Soon other men stood up, their faces illuminated by the flame of contained indignation. The authority of Raphael was crumbling like a sand castle under the storm of reality. The stranger cowboy leaned against the bar, observing how the town recovered its backbone. "What do you want to do with him?" Lucas asked Alina, recognizing that she was the true leader of this improvised trial. She looked at the fallen giant, the man who a second earlier believed himself a god. "Justice," she answered with crystal clarity. "Not revenge, because revenge would make us equal to him. Take him before the district judge in Chihuahua, where the evidence cannot be buried. I have all the necessary proofs for him to spend the rest of his days in a cell in San Juan de Ulua." The men of the town, now armed with a courage that had been denied to them, surrounded Raphael. They lifted him roughly, stripping him of his silk jacket and his false honor. They took him out of the cantina to put him in a cargo cart, the same one he used to transport the fruit of others' labor. The sun was beginning to set, tinting the Sonora desert with shades of orange, purple, and the color of redemption. Alina walked out into the street followed by the cowboy, the man who had been the catalyst of her freedom. The air felt fresher now, as if the earth itself had given a sigh of relief. "What is your name?" she asked, her voice soft but loaded with genuine curiosity. The man remained silent for a moment, looking at the horizon where the stars were beginning to peek out. "Lucas," he finally said, revealing a name he had not pronounced in years. "Why did you stop, Lucas? You could have continued on your way and forgotten all this." "I don't like big men abusing the small," he answered simply, with the logic of someone who has seen too much injustice. "And I liked the way you defended what was yours. You showed more courage than all the men who looked down in that cantina." Alina smiled for the first time in a long while, a smile that illuminated her tired face and gave her back her youth. It was a smile that erased the dirt stains and the scars of the soul. "I am Alina," she said, extending a hand that no longer trembled. "My people owe you much more than a glass of water and thanks." Lucas adjusted the cinch of his horse, preparing for a departure that perhaps would not happen. "You don't owe me anything. Dignity is not billed. But maybe I'll stay a couple of days to make sure that document reaches its destination in Chihuahua." Alina approached him, breaking the distance the desert imposes between strangers. There was a spark of something new in her eyes, something that was neither gratitude nor fear. It was the electric connection between two souls who knew perfectly the weight of struggle and the taste of dust. "The Sonora Desert is vast and treacherous," she said softly, almost in a whisper. "It is better not to travel it alone when you carry truth as your baggage." Lucas looked at her intensely, searching in her eyes for a reason to stop being a nomad. He saw in her a strength rarely found in cities and an integrity that surpassed any noble title. He saw an intelligence that had outwitted the most powerful man in the region with pure willpower. "Maybe you're right," he conceded, allowing himself to imagine a future for the first time in a decade. They walked together down the main street of San Judas. Under the silvery light of the rising moon, the dust was still there, but the atmosphere was different. The air was charged with an electric possibility. There was a feeling of freedom that had not existed before, a fragrance of hope that bloomed among the cacti. Lucas knew that his past was dark, a web of decisions that pursued him like wolves in the night. He had been a soldier of the king who deserted when ordered to massacre innocents. He had made mistakes that could not be erased with water, only with present acts of bravery. But in that moment, under the immense sky of Sonora, he felt that his search for redemption could find a harbor. Alina told him about her tribe, the Children of the Winds. Dihu knew the secrets of the mountains. She told him how she learned to read and write with the Jesuit missionaries before they were expelled. She spoke of her dream of seeing her people living in peace, without fear that a falsified piece of paper would take away their right to exist. Lucas listened with attention that bordered on devotion. Every detail of her story drew him closer to her, as if each word was a rope tying him to life. It was not only her exotic beauty, which was great, but her indomitable spirit that captivated him. They arrived at Alina's small adobe house on the outskirts of town, a refuge against the mean world. The garden had agave plants that defied the aridity with vibrant colors. "Here is where I keep the original documents, under the ground that saw me born," she said. They entered the humble house, but it was filled with a peace Lucas did not know. There was an aroma of dried herbs, freshly ground corn, and a warmth that did not come from the weather. They spent the night talking, drawing detailed plans for the trial that would change the history of the region. Lucas realized that Alina was much more than a victim of unjust circumstances. She was a brilliant strategist, a woman who had understood that knowledge was the most powerful weapon against tyranny. She had collected names of accomplices, dates of attacks, and exact amounts of the bribes Raphael distributed. "You are a dangerous woman," said Lucas with a slight smile, the first to cross his lips in years. "Only when they try to take what I love and what is just by divine right," she replied with her chin held high. That night brought no rest. While Alina organized the evidence and Lucas reviewed every entry, news arrived that several of Raphael's men were still free. If they waited too long, the documents could disappear and the witnesses could be silenced. So they decided to leave at dawn. The next morning, the town of San Judas was in full activity, transformed by victory. An escort of volunteer citizens, armed with tools and determination, prepared for the journey. Lucas rode beside Alina, his dark figure contrasting with the glow of the sunrise. The road to Chihuahua was long, dangerous, and full of traps of nature and man. There were bandits lurking in the canyons, and the weather could change from an oven to ice in hours, but they advanced with unbreakable confidence, protected by the shield of their purpose. During the second day of travel, they faced an epic sandstorm that darkened the sun at noon. The wind blew with demonic force that threatened to knock down the horses and blind the travelers. Lucas used his heavy poncho to protect Alina, wrapping her in his own warmth and shelter. They took refuge under a millenary rock formation while the outside world disappeared under a mantle of sand. The heat of their bodies was the only real comfort against nature's unleashed fury. In that improvised shelter, amid the roar of the wind, Lucas finally confessed his truth. He had been a captain in the Spanish cavalry who refused to shoot at unarmed peasants. Since that day of moral disobedience, he had lived as a fugitive, a pariah with intact honor but a broken life. Alina remained silent. She did not try to absolve him or call him a hero. She simply sat beside him as the wind beat against the rocks. "I cannot change what you did before," she said finally, "but I can see what you chose to do today." Lucas lowered his gaze. No one had ever offered him forgiveness, and perhaps for that reason those words meant much more. When the storm began to subside, Alina briefly rested her hand on his. It was not a promise of love, but the silent recognition of two people beginning to trust each other. They arrived in Chihuahua 3 days later, their faces marked by exhaustion but their hearts on fire. The process was neither quick nor easy. Raphael's allies tried to discredit Alina by witnesses and make records disappear, but she had prepared copies, dates, and names. The inhabitants of San Judas, who had once looked down, testified one after another. After several weeks, Don Raphael was declared guilty of forgery, dispossession, and corruption. He lost the lands obtained illegally and was condemned for his crimes. The lands taken through false documents were returned to the families and communities that could prove their rights. Alina's name became synonymous with justice and courage throughout the province of Nueva Vizcaya. Lucas stayed by her side, not as a guardian but as a life companion. He was no longer the aimless stranger cowboy seeking oblivion at the bottom of a bottle. He was the man who protected the home he never thought he would have and the woman who gave him back his soul. With time, Elena and Lucas built a simple house on the lands she had helped recover. He stopped riding to escape his past. Now he rode to protect a home. She continued defending the families of the region with documents, memory, and a will that no landowner could break. Lucas remained by her side, not as her savior, but as the man who had learned to fight alongside her. Some afternoons they sat in front of the house and watched the sun sink into the desert. They did not speak of destiny or legends. It was enough for them to know that, for the first time, neither of them was alone. Perhaps true freedom is not riding without direction, but finding a place worth staying and fighting for. In San Judas, no one called Lucas a stranger anymore. But when that story was told, his name never appeared alone, because it was Elena's intelligence, the courage of a repentant man, and the late decision of an entire town that changed the destiny of the valley. The desert did not forget that day. Neither did those who understood that injustice only seems invincible, while everyone remains silent.